I'm Christy.
And I'm Karen. And you're listening to
The Modern Principal. We're two school leaders who support current and future principals to modernize the approach to supporting students and staff in our schools.
We strive to do it all through our approach of scholar,
The research and evidence,
systems,
the structures that sustain,
and soul,
the emotions and human side.
and hopefully we do it with a whole lot of laughs.
Thanks for joining us.
What's next? Our scenario. We get this question a lot. We always say that on every freaking pod.
Yeah, we do. we don't get this one a lot. We've never gotten it. In fact, we made it up. Just kidding. OMG, I'm starting my first year as a principal. We have gotten that a lot. And have no friggin' clue. Okay, that was a Christy exaggeration. What to even do. How do I best prepare for this year? Clueless in Seattle. You like it? It wasn't an alliteration, but like I thought it was good. I'm like... So, did you make any mistakes your first year?
None.
Me neither.
What was one?
Pod's done.
What was one?
Give me one. Oh my, like there's just so many. It's hard to, I went in too hard. Like I thought I was putting relationships first, but like after I developed relationships, like actual ones, I realized I wasn't. I went in a little bit too like rule heavy.
Got it.
Procedurally, yeah. And then I also, because I've gone back and forth between elementary and middle, like you have to recalibrate, I feel like, every time you do that. And so I'd come fresh off of a middle school AP job, and so my discipline was a little colder than maybe should have been for elementary, and that caused a few problems with parents.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny today. I walked into one of our buildings is running a summer school for middle school, and one of the interns is from elementary, admin interns. And I was talking to him and listening to him interact with a kid, and it was very elementary.
Yes.
And then the middle school principal was like, hey, kid, no, go to class. And they're like processing, why do you think that's appropriate? What would be
that to make sense?
Can you stop the game, go?
But can you do it even if you don't want to?
And the principal was like, you, go to my office. We'll call your mom. You're going home. And the elementary guy was like, oh. It was great. It was great. I will say my mistake was I got the worst advice of my life. God love him. From a principal I worked for prior to getting my first job. And his advice was, don't be yourself for the first 2 years. So I didn't know how to be, and I was like really awkward and robotic.
Yeah.
Because I was trying not to be like this version of me. So I was like, I think, like he was like, when you're really relaxed, you're a little too relaxed.
A little too much.
So be professional. And I had to find, I think being a female in leadership, you have to find what professional meets authentic.
I agree. I actually just had that conversation. We had an interview, like a mock interview today.
Yep.
And so I was talking to her, and she was like incredibly competent and just so clearly knowledgeable about every facet of the role that she was applying for and interviewing for. And I said, I don't even want to say this, but I'm going to say it. Just making sure that because you're so competent, making sure that you're super relational and you're smiling, because people really don't love a competent woman. They feel intimidated.
Yep. It's hard. It's a tricky line.
It really is.
But that's a pod for another.
That's a pod for another day. We're feeling like we want to rock the boat.
More just drop some bombs. Some fact bombs. All right. So let's talk about first year. Scala.
I love the scholar you came up with. Did you write this?
I did. Back in 1984. I coined it.
We read a book in our doctoral program.
And by read a book, I mean we read it, and then we had to write no less than 75 reflective papers about these frames.
Easily, yeah. So
no less than. I have referenced Bohlman and Deal 2003 no less than 65 times.
Easily. So Bohlman and Deal, is it just called The Four Frames?
I think so.
No. We'll put it in the show notes, whatever it is. But literally, I think it was one of the best leadership books I've read.
I agree. Okay, I disagree. But this fraction of it was really helpful. And I do still find myself, when I'm going into a problem, I do still find myself walking through these four frames.
Yes.
So I applied this to being a new principal.
Yes. I think this is perfect.
So why I think it's important to look through these 4 lenses as you're taking over is because it'd be very easy to just give you a list of tasks. Do this, do this, do this, do this. It'd be very easy to do that. In fact, we have those.
We do.
For sale.
We do have
For $4.99. Not really, I
I don't know.
But anyways, it is so much harder to figure out the leader you need to be in the environment you're walking into.
Yes. I think that's the trickiest thing is no matter how many interviews you do with like staff members,
Right.
or your central office staff, or whoever, other people who have opinions about the school that you're going to, you get in there and you're like, oh my God. Like,
Who are these people?
I remember thinking, I remember asking my supervisor, which probably she was like, I should have not have hired you, but saying, am I crazy for thinking that this is wild? Am I crazy for thinking that this is the right way to do it? Am I crazy? Am I crazy? Am I crazy?
Yeah. And the thing is, as a new principal, you don't know who you are as a leader yet either. And you also have to figure out what the building needs from you as a leader.
Yeah.
And so
It's a weird match.
It's a weird match. So giving just a general, we do and can give you a list of to-dos as a new principal, but it's more important to get your mindset on the invisible hurdles you're going to have to jump through. What do they call them? Sacred cows.
Yeah. And the frames are a really great way to do that.
They are.
So let's talk through a few of those.
Okay, so there are 4 frames. They're called structure, human resource, political, nice job motioning, and symbolic. So structure, those are roles, rules, goals, policies, environment. So to break that down a little bit, these are some questions you could be thinking through. When we talk about goals, that is like your school improvement plan. Who develops it? Who monitors it? How has that happened in the past? These are all the things you're going to try and figure out. What has happened up until this point?
Yep.
What are the teacher actions that everyone's really... Does anyone even know what your SIP is?
Or, like you said, what has happened up until this point, or what hasn't happened up until this point.
Right. Also in this frame, is it frame or lens? Frame. I wrote enough papers, so I don't know. Are the organizational structures. What's already in place in your building? What committees? Yep. What are the roles, responsibilities? Who has the decision-making power?
That's a really interesting one, because you might find sometimes that it's not who you think.
Right. But the other thing you need to look through, not just at your building, but at the district level too. What's the organizational structure
That's a really
there?
good one.
Who do you work with? Who do you respond to? Who are your questions? Who's your boss? Do you have 7 bosses? How does that work?
Yeah.
Who's in charge? Right?
Especially in a big district when there's a lot of different assistant superintendents and directors and all of that.
And the whole point of this is there will be answers, and then there will be unwritten answers. So your job as a new principal is to figure out what are the answers, and then what is the historical unwritten answers.
And that'll take time.
It will, but it's good to start asking questions and listening. Also in structure,
But don't ask your boss what are the hidden answers. No.
Also, if you get fired, we take no liability.
No. Well, that's our official statement.
I'll let our lawyer draft this up. Okay, so also within the structure frame is communication processes. How does communication go out within the building, within the community, within the student body, within the staff body? Horizontally, how does communication go from the different grades, vertically across teams? How does all of that work? What's tech's role in that? All of that kind of stuff.
Good one.
Okay, what's the next one?
Second frame is human resource, which is really the people, right? And not just who they are, but really what are their needs, what are their skills, what are their relationships, all of those things and the connections between those pieces. So we want to think about each individual in our building.
Yeah.
That's why we always recommend as a new principal, and maybe this comes later in the pod too, but really taking time to have one-on-ones or small group meetings with every person who is willing to in your building and asking, what are the things you love about this building? What do what do you wish could change? Those sorts of things, to really start getting a feel for what their strengths are, their styles, how they work together, knowing about their personal lives and how those might, all of those pieces influence the work that they do.
And you're not going to know all this before school starts. So this is good to have that you're kind of reflecting on throughout the year.
Yep.
Christy always wants to be a journaling principal.
I do, but I never was.
She never was, but she may be in the future. So these would be great things to take note of. Thinking about what are their strengths, what are their styles, how does staff work together? Who works together the best and who finds friction the easiest?
You'll also find if you do those one-on-ones, you'll start to realize who has capital in the building. Even just those one-on-one conversations give you a lot of information. I think too, as you go throughout the year, you'll figure out what those needs are of individuals. You'll figure out where there might be some weaknesses, where you can fill in some gaps. Hopefully you'll get close enough and have good enough conferences with folks to be able to figure out what their goals are for the future and how you can help them get there. And as well as, I think this is an interesting one that you put on here, is the amount of autonomy that is available. So in every district, especially if you're going into a new district, sometimes that's really hard to figure out. I've been in districts where literally teachers were expected to teach to a script. I've been in districts where there was like zero curriculum. And I've actually been in districts where it felt like both of those were both in place. Yes. A script and zero curriculum all at the same time. So I think that's a really interesting piece.
Also with, 100%. So the next frame is called the political frame.
This is the hardest one.
It's my favorite one.
That's why you're an HR.
It's also why I can't sleep at night, because I'm constantly thinking about chess moves. So this is about conflict. This is about competition. This is about resources, right? And so often as a principal, we don't think about resources, but you have to think about, there is such a thing as resource power. Who gets what when they want it? So not just like who gets the new desk, but like who gets the best class? Who gets the best sections? Who always gets the honors courses versus freshmen? Who gets to tell you no thank you to attending graduation? Who, like, where is that freedom? Who gets away with stuff when it comes to resources?
And what is your role going to be in that? And that, I think that is one of the trickiest pieces to navigate. I remember my first year, we had, send out attendance letters for people who were chronically absent, and they meant something, but they were more of an informational letter than like a warning, right? Like it was like, hey, FYI, you're at this many absences. And we had a family who was considered, quote unquote, important. And they got the attendance letter for the first time. Previous principals had never sent out the attendance letter. And they were like, what? To this family, because they were a quote unquote good, powerful family. And they flipped out. For receiving a standard policy document. Right. And I was like, well, I'm not playing those games. I said, we are following the same procedure. Everyone in our school will be treated equitably.
But those are the resources that we're
and you don't realize it until they're tearing up a letter and throwing it in your face.
Welcome to that, dear principal. It will happen. The other thing, it's kind of what Christy talked about, but like, who has the power and authority? There's going to be people who have positional power within your building, but also that personal power. So who are those players? How do they use their power? Is it for good? Is it not? And what does that look like within your building? And then what are the cliques? The other thing, I've been coaching a principal this year, and one of the hardest things for this individual was the previous principal had such strong cliques that anything she does is perceived as continuing that unless she's actively working against it. So she has to be so in her mindset of like, anything she does, if she talks to one person for 20 minutes longer than that person, she's perpetuating the stereotype that the other principal did. So some of those things you have to,
I don't even know you're going to be doing though.
You don't know what you're going to be doing. They're totally natural. And now all of a sudden you're just more of the same from the previous principal. It's tricky.
And then the very last frame is the symbolic frame, and that's really thinking about the culture, rituals, stories, myths, all those symbol pieces. Kind of, I don't think it's just relational, but it's kind of like all of the pieces that really that develop the symbols of the school.
like your mouse.
Like I just friggin' said.
No.
But thinking about your mission and your vision, right? And how they're exemplified each and every day. So many schools do have, I remember going into my first school and asking what the vision and mission was, and people had no idea. And they're like, I think we worked on that at one point. I think it's in our planner, like printed in our planner, right? That's fine. That gives you a lot of information, right? Thinking about what the schedule is, how it's created.
Oh my gosh, this was the best thing I ever did. My second year, we valued putting our students first, right? That's a pretty
how they say.
I followed a student that I would call disadvantaged and maybe disenfranchised. I spent from the moment he got off the bus with him, I just shadowed him, to the moment he got on the bus at the end of the day. And we did not include him in anything. He missed there. And
While you were following, even people knew you were following him.
it was just part of his day. The way he had like pull out for support, the way he was inadvertently punished, the way that because he missed something because he was getting a resource service when he came back, he had work to make up and no one noticed that he was missing that work. So then he had to miss some recess minutes. And I was a silent observer. I did nothing. I said nothing. I was just nearby and just watching. And I was like, oh, our schedule was set up to keep him disenfranchised. Yeah. And the way that we were setting him up was to fail. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow. That was never told me that story.
That was wild. I wrote a whole paper on it.
I always thought about doing that at one point of following a student, but I thought it would always be more impactful in secondary because I always thought, oh, elementary, like we are so close to them. But that's really interesting that you did it all.
I think sometimes with elementary, we find we want to throw so many supports at them that the amount we're throwing at them is actually removing all of the actual instruction that they need.
That's fascinating. That could be its own pod.
Okay, moving on. With that, values.
All of, the values that are stated from employees and staff and families. Also the values that are unstated, which you're going to find that throughout the year.
Yeah. How are your teachers treating each other? How are your parents treating your teachers? And vice versa. How are your teachers treating your parents?
Yep.
How are your students?
How does your secretary answer the phone?
Yep. How do your teachers treat your students? Vice versa. How do your students treat your teachers?
Yep.
This one was the hardest for me. I think it depends on the community of which you start. But when I started, this was a school that grandma, mom, and now child all attended. And so it was rich with the symbolicness, with these values and the rituals. And I had to be so cautious for what I chose to remove.
Yes.
It was also challenging in some degree to be authentic to myself,
Right.
and authentic to the history. So it's tricky, but
You have a line, and we want you to be authentic to yourself as leaders, but also remembering that you are a piece of your school's puzzle.
Yeah.
Not the only piece. So,
all right. So those frames hopefully give you some guiding questions.
hopefully.
Some lenses to look through.
So thinking through the
System side of it, there's so much you can do systems-wise to get to know these frames a little bit deeper.
I do think if you can do our new principal course and look at our checklist, I think that you'll be really happy because especially the systems piece is reflected really well there in more detail. But essentially, I love that you've titled this light reading. We'll start there and then we'll go back to meetings. Light reading. This is easy to do before you even are on contract. If you want to, right?
Yep.
Get the board policy from your district. It is important. Like you need to read board policy. And then I would also ask your supervisor, which policies are most pertinent to you. Like obviously you want to read and have an idea of what's in the entire document, but there are going to be policies that your supervisor knows that you will need more than others.
Yep, and have your discipline code of conduct from either the student handbook or from your board policies. Laminate that baby in a binder because you're going to be flustered the first time you have to suspend a kid and you're not going to be like, what's that code?
Right.
So just have that ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's handbooks you should read. We recommend
every handbook. Yeah.
Yep. We recommend reading former staff evaluations from previous years. We can get deep into that as to why, but we also recommend just diving into your school data.
The public data that's, made available on probably your Department of Education website. And then if you have access to other data in terms of maybe your NWEA or iReady or FountainBridge, whatever that might be, to kind of start getting a feel for where everything's starting at when you go.
I'll tell you, this was super embarrassing mistake I made, but I remember being at a meeting. Well, my first meeting I was at, I didn't silence my phone. So that was fun. At district level. I was like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. The second meeting I was at, I remember someone saying, what's your free and reduced count, Ohio? And I remember going, oh my God, I don't know the exact number. Well, and then someone said, it's probably this percent of your population. How many kids do you have? I don't know! You don't think to yourself to think I need to know how many kids I have. You need to know how many kids you have.
You need to know those basic numbers. Yes, I wish I had done this. I think I assumed I was going to get more onboarding as a principal, as a new one. I was shocked at how little onboarding I got. And in hindsight, I wish I would have created my own. And so really scheduling meetings with the head or whoever was appropriate of the departments. So of, my direct supervisor, my buildings and grounds and custodial staff, the special education department, curriculum
Director of
finance, HR, like really sitting down to meet with the people that were most pertinent and knew what I needed to know about those departments and about the procedures within them. Because I didn't personally get any formal onboarding. You might as a new principal. And so I think it's really important to ask what onboarding you can expect.
Yep.
And if it sounds minimal, to start planning your own. I remember one of my first, you have PTA on our host. I remember one of my first PTA meeting. And they were like, and now for the principal's report. And I said,
Oh, I did that too.
you don't have
I did not. I was supposed to have a report. Literally saying. I remember that. Oh, my report is,
Hi, I am the principal.
and I am so prepared, even though I look like a young blonde. We also recommend, obviously, meeting with your teachers.
Yeah.
Community people, all those kind of things.
Your custodian.
And your secretary, man. And your head lunch lady.
Yes.
Your kitchen manager. You got to figure out that lunch schedule ASAP.
Sit down and really meet with those people and ask them
What works, what
what
doesn't,
what
do you
doesn't,
need?
and what they want from you, what they would hope that you would bring for their department and your leadership.
Yep, 100%. Other managerial systems that we think are important, understand the tech that you have, understand the organizational.
On our checklist, we have an entire list of every single type of tech application you need to make sure you're
74 pages later.
And it just, there's so many. And here's what's going to happen is someone's going to forget to add you. So it's nice to have the list to ask ahead of time.
Yep. Here's my best advice. So we could go on and on the different managerial stuff. The biggest thing is when you're meeting with people, figure out who knows what.
Yeah.
And get them to teach you.
Yeah.
I still struggle with our student information system. I can find the basics, but even today, I called. I'm in HR, as you guys know, and sometimes I still have to look up student systems. And the person in HR that used to be a building secretary, she's on vacation this week. So I literally had to call my old secretary. Hey, girl. Hey, remember me? How do I access this screen again? So always have your people that can help you find stuff.
Totally agree.
All right. Anything else? Lots of prep stuff. We can work through that.
We talk so much.
Yeah, we're loud. Okay, so let's just get into some soul. Here's what I'll say. There is, I found this article I think was great. It was by, what is that?
Bryk and Schneider?
Bryk? It's Bryk.
Bryk.
Bryk and Schneider, 2003. They referred to trust as the connective tissue that binds individuals together to advance the education and welfare of students.
I like that.
I know, I did too. So with everything you're doing as a new principal, you have to be conscious about, is this action building trust or taking away trust? So thinking about, obviously there's so many benefits of trust. We won't go into those. Maybe I'll say them really quick. Greater teacher buy-in.
She can't help herself.
I can't. But regardless, if you don't have trust, if you don't have visibility, if you don't have one-to-one connections, if you don't celebrate your folks, any best laid plan is going to fall flat.
Yep. Really this summer, before your first job as principal, is really gathering as much information as you can and building relationships as quickly and as deeply as you can.
Yeah. And that requires listening.
It does. It requires a lot of listening on your part. We always recommend to hopefully try to make as few changes as possible in your first year, but we also understand that you might have to make changes.
Right.
When I think we talked about like our biggest faux pas as our first year, I had to make some significant like policy and safety changes, and they were not popular, but they were necessary to be in compliance, right? And to be safe. And so there are going to be things that you do that might be a breach of trust, even if they're for the best of the community. And so building trust and putting those deposits in as much as you can will really help when you have to do those things.
And here's what I will say is the best advice I can give. And I've seen a few principals fall flat in this area. I think we try so hard to show everyone who we are that we don't take time to get to know who they are as a new leader. So I would encourage you, you will show yourself in so many different ways. You do not need to worry about telling people. Just listen. When people are talking to you, just literally listen to them.
Be truly present.
Be truly present, and don't worry about how you're presenting in that moment. Besides presenting as someone who values their opinion.
Yep.
Right?
I had a principal at one point who, when we were talking, was always on a computer or sending a text or finishing up an email or something. And if you do have to do that, if somebody walks in unexpectedly saying, hey, give me 30 seconds, let me finish this email, and then I can focus on you.
Right.
Really trying to make sure that you give people your focus.
I've also met a principal that literally needed to like wax on about who he was almost every conversation. And that's okay, but you don't need to. And then you're missing what the other person is trying to tell you that they value. So if you don't spend time, why are you laughing?
I just think that's funny.
But like, I think some new people feel so strongly that they have to tell everyone who they are.
And your actions can actually show
100% that it will show everything about who you are.
Yeah.
So that
right
is
into our desk, from the desk of the Maya principal.
So from the desk, what you do is what matters. Not what you think of, not what you talk about, or not what you plan. It's what you do. That's from Fried and Hanson. I don't know who Fried is, but I want to be them. Anyways, that's all we got.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.